Alright, so in this section covering weeks 6 and 7, right, we want to focus on some of the other wisdom books, right? So in the first section we kind of looked through the structure of Proverbs, how it's set up. Second section we talked about how to teach wisdom concepts, and in this section we want to deal with some of the other wisdom books, just kind of give you some things to think about to kind of stir your kind of thoughts for these other books, and then you can spend some of your own time kind of this quarter going over research on some of the different books. You might pick one or two that are more interesting to you, because you'll need to know a few things to have researched some stuff from these other books as well for your final, right? Okay, so let's get right into it. We'll start with Job, right? So Job traditionally is thought of as being one of the older books, but if you've taken the Exodus class with us, I kind of speak there about how some findings in Egypt from one of the pharaohs of Moses' time in the 1440s actually has a monument that we found where he cursed a leader of Moab by the name of Job, right? And so it's that could explain some of the oldness associated with Job, because the books of Moses, although Moses is not the oldest story, Moses was the one that wrote the Pentateuch, right, the first 5 books, and so that was the beginning really of the recorded history of the Bible. So although there was a lot of things that went on before Moses, the earliest books that we have in terms of them actually being written down would have been during Moses' time, right? And so that might explain how Job got in there. It's possible if Job was the same person. So whether that's the biblical Job or not is hard to tell, but we do know that the Pharaoh of the 12th dynasty there, without getting into it too much, if you haven't had the Exodus class, some of that you just have to take on my word there until you get to the Exodus class. But the idea is that one of these pharaohs, we found a monument where he cursed a leader of Moab, the chief of Moab, and his name was Job, right? So it very well could be, because the Bible says in the book of Job, it talks about him being a leader in Moab. The chief of Moab, actually, is what it says. And so is it the same Job that was the chief of Moab? It's hard to say. I mean, there very well could have been 2 men named Job who were the chief of Moab. But anyways, just kind of interesting thought. Now, so a couple of things here. Notice the stylistic difference between Job and just about every other book in the Bible. It's written with a different kind of vocabulary, different perspective. It's a very different, even the poetry feels different in it, right? So I attribute this possibly to the fact that Job was from Moab, right? And so maybe they had a slightly different literature style there, right? So this was someone from another country, right? So Job was not from Israel there, that he was chief of Moab. Alright, so keep in mind, most of the wisdom is at the end when the Lord is speaking. It doesn't mean all the wisdom is at the end, right? But I would say that the parts, because if you're not familiar with Job, it's broken up into several lengthy discourses. So some of it is Job speaking for a while, and then one of his friends will come over and respond, and then Job will respond back to them, and you kind of go back and forth between Job and his friends, and then you get certain sections where it's the Lord responding then, right? Particularly at the end there, we get the Lord's kind of, okay, I've been listening to you this whole time, now here's my response, right? And so the important part is not just that the wisdom is found in the Lord's section, but kind of the second part of that point is don't look for it in the speeches of the friends. That's important, because the Lord corrects the friends because they're wrong in what they say. So you can't just take the book of Job and slice and dice it without an appreciation for context, because a lot of Job is the display of incorrect thinking, right? And then the Lord corrects it all right at the end, right? So you got to be careful about going through and just picking a verse or two here or there from the book of Job, because a lot of it is incorrect. They're wrong in the way that they're viewing the world, and that's what the book is designed to show, is how wrong these different worldly perspectives actually are. And when the Lord comes in and gives His perspective, you begin to see, wow, okay, that they were wrong. And so you want to have that in mind when you're viewing the book of Job. Don't just take what the friends are saying and try and apply that as wisdom. The wisdom is not found in what they're saying. It's found in the Lord's kind of summary, right? And there might be a few spots where Job speaks where there's some good things, because some of what Job is saying is correct, right? But just understand what you've got with the book there. All right, and that kind of leads into the third point. The friends represent earthly wisdom, and this book has them in very stark contrast at several points with the Lord, right? And so the way I tend to view this book is to go back in and look at the different perspectives that his friends take, and realize that those in many ways are worldly perspectives. And so the wisdom is in many ways an understanding how differently a kingdom perspective is as compared to a worldly perspective. And so when you're looking for the wisdom there, understand that it is this kind of compare and contrast between what God says and a few things that Job throws in versus the way the world views his situation, right? A couple other interesting things. Job 19:25, he uses the word redeemer, right? Have you ever heard that song, I Know My Redeemer Lives? That comes from Job, right? So Job is talking about how he knows his Redeemer lives. So that's kind of an interesting kind of side aspect in some ways to this book, is that Job is looking for a Redeemer, right? So I wouldn't go so far as to say that Job had any understanding of Jesus, who is our Redeemer, right? But the Holy Spirit being over all of the Word, I believe, has integrated that concept into the book of Job of a Redeemer. And so, you can look at it that way. And then the other thing is, you look at the book on a whole. In many ways, it embraces the picture of what has been happening in humanity. That the enemy has tried to attack us, but God has been watching over us, and God has a plan to bless us and restore us in the very place that the enemy has tried to defeat us. And through the midst of it, Job is longing for his Redeemer to come and make everything right. So I think when you look at the big picture of the book, there is a Christ-centered theme, right? Even though obviously Jesus is not mentioned anywhere in the book, but I do believe that the events of Job's life are not just random. It's not just a historical story, although it's a true story, obviously. But it is not just there to give us history. The text of the Bible is chosen by the Holy Spirit to teach us principles about the Lord. And so I think that one of the key things when reading the book of Job is to understand the big picture principle, that Job was attacked, right? The enemy tries to destroy Job, but God doesn't let him be completely destroyed. God brings him back, right? So there's all kinds of implications there. In different ways you can apply that. I think one of the main things is to apply it just to God's people in general. That the enemy wants to see us destroyed, right? You could almost put Job in the place of Adam, and say, because God says, have you considered Job? That he's an upright servant, and Adam was upright before the fall, and here comes the enemy longing to destroy, but then the Lord redeems him, and in the second half is better than the first. And I tend to look at that almost like a picture of resurrection, that Job's second half, where he was blessed, could be a picture of resurrection or salvation. So there's a lot of themes that you may want to go back in and look at in terms of Job. So Job is not like Proverbs, where you're just going to go through line by line and get wisdom. Job is more of a historical wisdom, if I could say it that way, that it is the story itself contains some themes of wisdom that you can apply. All right. Then Ecclesiastes. Right. This is kind of an interesting one. We get the name Ecclesiastes from the Septuagint, named it that. The Hebrew word for the title is Qoheleth. Right. Qoheleth. Which means is the Hebrew word for collector or assembler. Many translations, you'll see them use the word preacher. The reason that they say that is because they're applying that word assembler or collector to an assembly of people, right? So a preacher preaches to an assembly, right? He assembles all the people in front of him and then preaches. And so that's where they're getting that word preacher in some of these translations. But really it just means collector or assembler. So it could mean preacher, but if you're using it, trying to figure out the context of it, you could maybe say what they meant was something like a preacher. But the word itself does not really mean preacher. It means assembler or collector. And then they translate that into preacher because to do that you have to make the assumption that what is being assembled is people, right? And then them being taught, right? But many people assume Qoheleth to be almost in some ways maybe even a picture of wisdom, right? That Qoheleth, the preacher, the assembler, the collector, however you want to translate that word, in many people's view is almost wisdom itself. You know how like in the Proverbs, it almost personifies wisdom. Wisdom is a beautiful woman, that kind of thing, a doe, that it has a tendency to personify wisdom. And so it's possible that this Qoheleth is the personification of wisdom, or it could just be, the title of this person that wrote it, right? And so that's where I want to focus more on this book. So Job, I kind of talked about what was the theme. Ecclesiastes, I think an interesting thing to look at is who wrote this book, right? Many people assume that Solomon wrote the book, and it's possible that he did. So I don't want to say that he didn't, because he's still a very strong candidate. But I don't think it's as cut and dry as some people assume, that Solomon was clearly the person that wrote this. The only title at all in the book is just the very first line, in a reference rather to an author rather, is right there in the beginning. It says the words of Qoheleth, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, right? And so, son of David, king in Jerusalem, fits with Solomon, right? But the truth is, Solomon was literally the son of David, but we also know that was a title that all the kings of Jerusalem took, right? Was son of David, right? That even years later, even Jesus, as a descendant, took on that. Although he was above David, so that's where he gets, he kind of teaches the Pharisees, how can my Lord say to my Lord? But we know that title, son of David, was not just exclusive to his literal children, it was also his descendants. So to say that the book says a son of David, king of Jerusalem, wrote it, so it has to be Solomon, is not necessarily true, right? So it could be Solomon, but the title itself does not exclude, the other kings of Israel, or of Jerusalem, rather. Now, the other thing it says, it calls him king of Jerusalem, right? So it is true that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem, but if you go back through and look through the historical books, Chronicles, Kings, all of that, where the life of Solomon is talked about, he's referred to as the king of Israel, right? Because it was a unified kingdom under Solomon. So it could just be a reference to the fact that his actual throne was in Jerusalem, but if you look at a more traditional historical, if I didn't say to you Solomon wrote that and you just went in there and read it, son of David, king of Jerusalem, one thing that might come to mind is, was this someone after the split, right? Because after the split, when it was Judah and Israel, then their kings tended to more associate themselves with Jerusalem and not just Israel in general. So that's a possibility. But it doesn't exclude Solomon though either. It could just be, the particular wording of this was that he chose to call himself king of Jerusalem because he was still king of Jerusalem, right? A couple verses that are kind of interesting is 1 verse 17, chapter 1 verse 17. He says, "I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after the wind." Let me go to the verse before that, actually, in verse 16, that kind of leads up to it. He says, "I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me." Right? So, I mean, if it's Solomon, the only one over Jerusalem before him was David. So it seems a strange way to say that if it's Solomon, because Solomon was the second king. Unless in Solomon's mind he's looking at Absalom, had a time there, but he's using the plural form of people who were over Jerusalem before him, right? Could it be a reference to other people? Jerusalem had been a city for over 1,000 years, and so there were other kings there. So could he be talking about other kings, that had reigned there? Melchizedek reigned in Jerusalem, So it's just kind of, I'm just throwing out some things to think about. But there's another place too, as I put there in verse 2, chapter 2, verse 7 through 9. We'll go down to verse 9 of chapter 2. It says, "So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me." So it could be talking about Solomon. It's possible. But it just seems a very weird thing for Solomon to say, that he's trying to surpass all of these people who were before him in Jerusalem. Because you're thinking, well, who is he talking about? David reigned before him. And that's it as far as Israel is concerned. It's just one person. Maybe Absalom he's thinking about. I don't know. But it is just kind of a strange, if it is Solomon, that's a strange way for him to describe his efforts, to say that he became wiser than all of the leaders of Jerusalem who were before him when he was the second king. So anyway, so that's something interesting. So I guess the thing to think about is a lot of what we just in our kind of Christian subculture, when we think about Solomon, we talk about all his, he tried all these things and tried to, that comes from Ecclesiastes, right? A lot of the stuff that people just talk about that they just totally attribute to Solomon, about how tried all kinds of pleasures and nothing satisfied me. We tend to have that in our subculture, in our mind there, that's all referring to Solomon. But if you just look at the historical records of what Solomon did, we don't get any of that, right? That only comes from this book of Ecclesiastes. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not 100% that this is Solomon who tried to fulfill his soul with nothing but pleasure. It could be. But it could also have been a king after Solomon who determined that, because any of the kings would have had the chance to do that. We tend to think it was only Solomon, but any of the kings of Israel, they were a king. And so if it had been in any of the wealthy times of Israel, king of Judah would have had plenty of opportunities to try out whatever pleasures he was interested in trying. Solomon wasn't the only king that had that at his disposal. He does talk about wisdom quite a bit, but if you're king over a nation, you probably assume that you have wisdom, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that he had the wisdom of Solomon. He talks about how he had wisdom, but even a lot of people today would assume they have wisdom. So just because he talks about wisdom and he was a king in Jerusalem doesn't mean that it was Solomon. And in fact, the name Solomon is not anywhere in the book, whereas it is in the other works that he did. Right, his name shows up. This one, the name Solomon is not in there anywhere. It just says a king of Jerusalem, son of David. So anyways, kind of interesting things to think about, that we want to at least be aware of the fact that if this isn't Solomon, then we may need to rethink some of the assumptions we've made about Solomon by reading Ecclesiastes, right? Because in many ways, some of the more negative things that we associate with Solomon, we get from the book of Ecclesiastes. So the trouble is if Solomon is not the one that wrote Ecclesiastes, it's hard to unassociate things that you've already associated with Solomon from having read it so many times, and just in our Christian subculture, we associate now so many of these things from Ecclesiastes with Solomon that it's hard to unassociate them. Even if you found out that that it was somebody else, it's still in our mind, that this is how Solomon was. So maybe it is, maybe it's not. Just something for you to go back in and study on your own there. And then the Song of Songs, we could also call it the Song of Solomon. The interesting thing, I think, in this one is what is the purpose of it, right? And there's all kinds of allegorical, typological, kind of interpretations of this book, right? So at its core, it's a love story. Right. At its core, it's a love story. The question is, who are the characters in the love story? Right. You could go at maybe a literal thing, that maybe literally it was Solomon and one of his wives or something, right? And so there's that level of interpretation. There's the early Jewish. I've got that in the first one. The early Jewish targums, interpreted allegorically to be a representation of Israel. From the time of the Exodus to their time, and how God loved them and protected them and provided for them all the way through, and kind of that story there of the love, which we do get that several times throughout the Old Testament, that God talks about their time in the wilderness was almost like a courtship period where the Lord was loving on them and showing them that He loved them, right? And so God does use that imagery in other places besides this. And then many people in the New Testament now see it as a type of Christ and His love for the church. Right? And I think both of those are applicable, because it's the same God. That God loved His people in the Old Testament. God loves His people through Christ in the New Testament. That God is love, and so I think both are probably acceptable ways to look at that. That it's a picture of God's love for His people, right? The neat thing is some of the last, right at the very end there, chapter 8, verse 13. There's only one, it's the last. It should be 13 and 14 too, but kind of that last section there that begins in verse 13. Basically, what's going on is the lover, the male, goes up onto the mountain, and the woman stays down in the valley, and she closes by pleading with him to return quickly. Right? And so many have seen in that a picture of Christ going up to heaven, being on the mountain, going up to the heavens to bring her back something, right? And so she's waiting on Him in the valley, which is like the church waiting on the Lord on the earth, waiting for Him to return, in her words where she's pleading with Him, please return quickly. Right, which is in many ways a picture of Christ and the church waiting on Him. So these kind of three books, I just want to draw some attention to them, give you some things to think about. So in this last section, I think it'd be important for you to maybe go through and do some research on some of these other books of wisdom as well. They contribute their own unique kind of take on things. Each one is fairly unique. All right, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Job are very unique in the text. There's not many other books like them, right? That's one thing about the wisdom literature. Proverbs is unique. Psalms is unique. that this collection of wisdom literature, that each one kind of takes a different perspective on it. Whereas Chronicles, Kings, Samuel, Genesis, in many ways they read very similarly, right? But when you start getting into the wisdom literature, each one is fairly unique. So it'd be good to go back in and do some independent study on those.